everyone. It is my great pleasure to introduce Gates Callanan, an adjunct professor at the Rhode Island School of Design at the Massachusetts College of Arts and Design. Gates is an artist, animator, filmmaker, and puppet armature fabricator who designs the internal frameworks of models for beautiful stop-motion films such as Guillermo del Toro's Oscar-winning Pinocchio, the Leica studio film The Missing Link, and the Peacock TV show, and Peacock TV's In the Know. They are also currently getting their master's in animation with the Estonian Academy of Arts. Gates creates richly textured worlds where every shadow invites you to look closer, using experimental animation that mixes sculptural and illustrative mediums, movement, and subconscious imagery to create truly spectacular work. Their experimental animation is celebrated at film festivals such as Stop Trick at International Film Festival, Chroma Arts Film Festival, Portland Underground Film Festival, Canby Film Festival, and many, many more. Please welcome our speaker, Gabe Callanan.
Thanks, Sally. Let's get started here. I'm just gonna encourage you guys to ask me questions during the presentation if you like. I'm happy to kind of take a minute and answer some questions, or we can do that at the end too. But if you have something that pops into your mind, feel free to ask it. I love that. Okay, so this is line in motion. Oh, the line's not moving though. One sec. Oh, there we go. Looking back to animation. Okay. That's it. That's my no kidding. All right. So I'm gonna start here with cave paintings, which because illustration, is the origin of pictorial storytelling, and cave paintings are already kind of sequential art, as you can see here. So look at that. People are already basically animating way a long time ago. Okay, so let's move along here. Okay, and then for my next slide here, I have illustration of theater, Chinese shadow puppetry. The reason why I have this slide on here is because it's a really interesting blend between illustration and kind of a cinematic art form, right? And I also love that it's said to be invented by a minister who presented the silhouette of Emperor Wu Di's deceased concubine to console the monarch. And I think that it's interesting that grief necessitated the invention of an entirely new art form, right? So I think this is a great example of how, the point of art, right, is to tell our story to ourselves, to our friends, to the world, right? So, yeah, Chinese shadow puppetry. It's also a UNESCO intangible cultural heritage art form. So it's really disappearing, and I encourage anybody to look more into this if you can, because it's kind of a dying art, and it's really beautiful and fascinating. Okay, so moving on. Okay, many of you will probably be familiar with images like this, right? This is a painting technique involving chiaroscuro. So the artist is painting with these really beautiful, beautiful light effects. And the reason why I have this up here, I'll come back to it a little later, but a lot of these pieces like this are an inspiration for filmmakers and animators in terms of light. A lot of people who work in lighting on film and directors of photography consider themselves painting with light. And that inspiration comes from illustration and art. So I have this here. Okay. So let's just look at the time period as well. 1607, right? So we're going to jump forward in time quite a bit to the beginning of animation. So 1825, we have something here called the thaumatrope. Has anybody seen this before? You guys are familiar with this? Okay. So what happens here is that you have an image, right? And you have a piece of string, and you wind it up, kind of, you twist it so that the images flip back and forth really quickly. And one image, each image leaves a persistence of vision, like an image imprint on the retina of your eye. And that allows your brain to see both images together. And this is like very, very rudimentary early animation as a toy, as entertainment. Okay. So moving forward a little bit, just a few years here, we have the phenakistoscope. So this is a really fascinating object that's kind of like a scientific illusion magic object, right? In 1825, where they have these, I'm just gonna walk through these kind of slits in the disc that if you look through in the mirror, so the image is facing the mirror, right? You'll be able to see the animation because the slits are creating that, it blacks out the image, right? So in that case, you need that in order to have the latent image on the retina of your eye and create that persistence of vision and perceive motion because your brain is filling in the gaps between the images. So the movement really happens in between the frames. A lot of animators will say that the magic is happening in between the frames, right? So that's where your brain is creating the illusion of motion. Okay. Great. So moving forward a little bit to the praxinoscope. This is really cool. It's a similar concept, except it's in more a three-dimensional shape. It kind of looks like a cake. This one, actually, you can see my mouth, right? Okay, this one has mirrors on it, actually, which is really cool. So you can watch the illustration go around in the mirrors as well. The other one is a little more rudimentary. And then Amanda mentioned, actually, they're selling records now that are animatable. So they kind of look like this, right? A record's flat. And then you can, I guess, have it spin on the turntable and have a strobe light on your phone. There's an app made by an animator that turns your phone into a strobe light and you can animate your record. So that's a fun fact. Really cool. Yeah, you can look those up. Okay, moving on. Okay, so again, let's look at the time period. We're going to jump ahead about 100 years here. And I have to bring up Lottie Reininger, an early animator, one of the first, is the earliest surviving full-length animated feature film. So this is a feature film-length film. It's made completely from cutout black paper and illustrations in the background. So I put this in here because it's really like a perfect beginning of where illustration and cinema come together to create a beautiful art piece. I had the privilege of watching this on the big screen with a live orchestral score, and it was absolutely incredible. You can find this online. It's amazing. I highly recommend it. This animator is incredible. She did everything herself, really, with I think some help from her husband, and she cut out everything by hand. So anyway, it's 1926, so there's no laser cutter at that time. I don't think. Yeah. So incredible stuff. Okay. So let's come back to chiaroscuro lighting, right? I mentioned it earlier. These are some examples of how animators are using this kind of lighting to inform, the plot point in their film, right? So they're creating a mood, they're setting the scene, and you can see it. I actually had to really kind of look for this one because it only happens very quickly during the scene in Disney's Bambi. You can see it's just a flash, but those several frames of the lightning creating this kind of high contrast, intense emotional moment make all the difference in the animation, okay? So painting with light, super important based in illustration. Illustration informs animation because if you think about it, illustration is so much older, right? So animation's really building off of illustration in a big way. So if you're wondering how does animation connect and why does it matter to you as an illustrator, there's one reason. There will be more. Okay. So I have to put this in here because I made this kind of lighting stand-in for my mom who's sitting right here to create some of My Little Pony drawing and paintings. But really the caption that I have there, sometimes you have to make what you want to make. I didn't really know what I was doing. I was heavily discouraged from making these armatures in my animation program because, well, it's not animation. What was I doing really? But I stubbornly kind of persisted with armature making because it's a passion of mine and I love it. So yeah, there's some uses for it as well outside of animation. You could always make a fun little lighting. There are a lot easier ways to do it than this, though, just in case you're worried. Okay. So at what point does an image become an illustration? So we have some really silly illustrations here by me. I made these on a trip, like a really long flight, just messing around on my iPad, and I thought, hey, maybe I could just animate. So how it feels to be an animator, how it feels to be an animator's cat. Just guessing, yeah. So every image that's illustrated, can have the potential to be animated as well. So if you think about your illustration, even if you're not going to animate it, how could it move? And I'll talk a little bit more about that later and why that could be important to you. All right. Ooh, oh boy. Here we go. Okay. Some more ridiculous stuff here. So can you create these images in real time? I hope not. Okay. Yeah, please don't shove your cat into a Pop-Tart. And I don't think you can find a liquefied skeleton anywhere around, hopefully. But my point is that these images can only be made through animation. And in a sense, illustration as well, because that's where they started from, right? Every animation kind of starts with a drawing and an illustration. So moving on. Okay. So let's talk more about how animation can inform illustration. And we'll start with the emotion and the perspective. We'll move on to composition, physics. We'll talk about sound, and then we'll just briefly touch upon composition. Okay. So I chose this image because it was drawn by, Juan Diaz-Canales and Juanjo Guarnido. Those two guys worked for French Disney. As you can see, there's some French. And I chose this image because it's a really great example of cinematic composition and illustration, okay? It's kind of an unconventional viewpoint, unless you're looking at film noir and cinema. In that case, it's probably familiar to you. I don't know if you guys watch a lot of crime movies or anything like that, or Alfred Hitchcock. But this is a great example of that. So you can see that the cat is in 1/3 of the frame. That's typical cinematic composition. And you can also see the Venetian blinds, the backlit smoke, a lot of inspiration from that kind of filmmaking. And to prove my point, I have a next image here from Psycho, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Now, this shot is even more suspenseful because this top-down shot shows us this character here with a knife, very well lit. This guy doesn't see him yet. So we know things that this main character doesn't. We have these long ominous shadows, these really dynamic shadows here, specifically lit to create these dynamic lines and effects. So you can think about that kind of thing while you're illustrating. No. Okay. This is a shot from a film that I'm currently working on that I'll show you guys some clips of later. It's also a top-down shot, and that's a little character with a DJ table. And I think it gives the feeling that the character is a little bit boxed in, and we are looking at them sort of like maybe like a fly in a jar type of mood. So it's a certain food. Okay, moving on. Okay, let's talk about Star Wars. If you'll allow me to really nerd out for a moment. The reason why I broke these down like this is because I think I was kind of having a heated discussion with another person about composition in Star Wars and why I hate the new films and the way they're composed. I know you can yell at me later, but the point is that, I have a list of things that I really, really hate about this, so I need to make sure that I get all of them. Here it is. Okay, so first of all, we have this really ugly tangent. And we also have this point of tension up here, which draws your eye to here and here, which isn't where you should be looking. You want to be looking here. We have this highlight here, which draws your eye out of the frame. We have this character facing towards the camera, drawing your eye down out of the frame. We have this highlight here. It's from somebody walking into this area of the frame, which is again, really bad for the 1/3 full, which is where your eye is automatically drawn to this third of the frame, and there's nothing there, and there's nothing that's going to happen there, and that's really important. And so this is setting up for some action to happen here, and it doesn't. It's just a total botched composition, in my opinion. And then this highlight also pulls your eye out of the frame. And this character is walking this way into the nothingness that's happening here. Again, pulling your eye away from what you want to be looking at, which is those two people having a really intense conversation. Okay. Now, that's from Rogue One in 2016. Then we look at A New Hope here. Everything is moving your eye towards these guys here. You have Han Solo, he's looking at them. You have this line of the wall that's pointing towards the people. You have this Y-Wing ship that is pointing again towards the conversation. This is Luke Skywalker. He's walking into this third of the frame. The camera follows him. I rewatched the scene just to be sure because I thought that it looked a little weird, but the camera pans to follow him. So that's implied movement into this frame. And you can use that in a sequential art form as well. So say if you're setting up your shot like this and you have a camera moving this way, maybe that informs your next panel. So while you may not be making a film, it's still important to think about these elements and where your eye is drawn to in the image, okay? Again, this one I'll just briefly talk about. Tangent here, split frame, which you can have a center composition, that's fine, but you really have to think about what information is here. There's nothing here. There's nothing here either where there's high contrast area. The information is all in here, which might be in the third of the frame that you want. However, this tangent directs your eye out. There's nothing really to direct your eye here. It's all very dark and poorly lit. Okay. This again, that's row one again, and this is a New Hope again. We have strong lines here, bringing our eye towards this area of the frame. We have a ship coming in, and it's a much better establishing shot overall. Okay, I've simplified it here with my drawing over it with my iPad just so you can see the values. But anyways, all right, moving on. Oh, I'm done talking about Star Wars. Okay. So, what can fixed framing teach us about composition? Can it help us think cinematically and narratively? I think yes. So, and here's why. Filmmakers have standardized framing, right? And illustration, it may have some standardized framing, but film is really much more fixed in terms of framing, right? You really have to stick to a 16:9, a 4:3 type of frame. And that has allowed people to experiment within those limits. So my thinking is that when you limit yourself in one area, the more variables that you take out, the more you can experiment with one variable, right? So if you limit yourself in one way, it kind of allows you to play around in another way. So that's something to think about, and something I think about in my own art. Sometimes I like to make things hard for myself in order to see how I can problem solve something. So, now I just had this from another presentation where I was kind of breaking down line and value. It's not a perfect one-to-one, but I just want you to notice these dynamic shadows and compositional points where, for example, this line is not directly perpendicular to the ground, or it is, or to the frame really. So everything is off kilter slightly, which is disconcerting. Another important thing that I want to note is that the lighting is not realistic to a household lighting. It's very cold. And color temperature is definitely something that you can employ in illustration as well, right? So you can see that the light is really strange. Hitting their head, it's really a cold light. Normally you would have a tungsten, nice warm interior lighting, but this tells us that something's not right. Something's off. If you've ever seen, does anyone know what film this is from?
Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah, Rosemary's Baby, right? So as you know, if you've seen the film, it's definitely foreshadowing with the shadows in the film. Literally foreshadowing. So right, there's this ominous shadow here, right? And in the composition, you can see that it cuts across these figures in kind of almost like a violent, spooky way. So yeah, foreshadowing things to come. Okay, let's talk a little bit about physics. So what can physics do for a still, sequential, and moving image? So I have the important to note, animation, drawing are not bound by physics, okay? So basically, you can do whatever you want, right? You're not bound, the page does not have any gravity, okay? But you're creating the illusion of space. So you want to be thinking about some kind of physics. In animation, you cannot get away from physics. Physics informs everything you do. It's a movement-based, time-based medium. You have to be thinking about some kind of physics, even if it's the complete departure from physics as we know them in real life, right? So in this image, we have a typical example of squash and stretch. I'm not sure if you have heard that term as illustrators. Maybe it's not as common, maybe it is, but in animation, squash and stretch is one of the main principles of animation. So we have unrealistic physics happening here for the purposes of humor. And then we have some more realistic physics happening here, where we have, the presence of gravity is shown by the air going through the creature's fur, right? So you can have unrealistic physics and realistic physics in the same story, as long as it's kind of supporting your narrative. Okay. Oh, and that was Bone by Jeff Smith, in case you're wondering. Great graphic novel. Okay, and this I just put in for fun. Every action does not have an equal or opposite reaction. Sorry, Newton, but in animation illustration, we don't have to abide by the laws of physics. Okay, so I don't think this is physically possible. I hope you haven't seen a mouse doing that. If you have, let me know. I want to hear about it. Okay. So let's talk about sound. I love talking about sound. It's one of my favorite things. So this is an image from a little dark and there's a light on it. I'm a little worried about that. Can you see it? Yeah. So what sounds, okay, I'm gonna put this question. What sounds can we obviously hear? What you say?
Stretching yeah.
Deep record player.
DJ playing.
Okay. Yeah, you got it. Yeah. So like a record scratch, yeah.
From the fluorescent light.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. Good. Nice. I'm gonna use this in my sound design. Look, keep giving me my anything else?
Probably something low level, the tactile is a hitting board when they were to make a scratch.
Yeah. Okay. This next question, it seems like it's the same question, but it's not. So what sounds could we possibly hear in this image? Is there a sound you can think of that you can't tell that you're hearing just by looking at the physical elements on the screen?
Music.
The music.
Yeah.
Okay, we're coming from the DJ player though, right?
Like a crowd. Like
A crowd of people. Yeah.
yeah, no, like a crowd.
Sneakers on the floor.
Great. Yeah, totally.
Somebody's breath.
Ooh, yeah. Okay, I love it.
Is that like feedback from the speakers?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you might be able to see the speakers here, but totally that's a good like atmospheric sound, yeah.
What if the sound is from, there's light from that other room, like what's going on over there?
Some sound from another room. Okay, okay.
Something of the lights and electricity.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, you can see the light, but yeah, that's a really good thinking for atmospheric sound, absolutely. Okay, yeah, great job. Okay, so you guys are getting what I'm saying and that you're thinking about things, especially like things coming from the other room or the sound of breath or the squeaky sneakers, right? What can you imply is happening with sound with this image, right? There could be, or a crowd of people, there could be a crowd of people that we're not seeing, right? And you might be thinking like, why does this matter to me as an illustrator? Because you can't employ sound design in a still image. You're not going to be able to use sound design for your still image. But if you think about the sound of your image, you might think, oh, is this happening during the nighttime and I'm hearing like a siren in the background? What time of day is this happening? How can sound inform the world that I'm building around my illustration? So if you think, oh, in this image, I'm imagining birds chirping. Well, what time of day do birds chirp? That will inform how you light your illustration, right? So thinking about sound design, I think, can really help illustrators kind of think about world building. Okay. So, yeah. Okay. Repetition. These are just some silly drawings from my sketchbook, especially the birds are very silly. But repetition is key to animation, and I think animation can inform illustration, and that if you think about how much drawing animators are doing, you want to be maybe matching that with your illustration. The more you draw something, the better you're going to be at drawing it. So if you want to get really great at making a character, maybe try animating it. You know, it can't hurt. Or just draw it a million times. But if you have a million drawings anyway, then it's awesome. Wow. Okay, so, there's my plug for animation. Okay. And here's my kind of little critique of animation. So they say this quote is actually misattributed to Albert Einstein a lot. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. It's not Albert Einstein, but it's a quote that exists. And then we have repetition is mastery, a Latin proverb. So is animation mastery or is it insanity? Or is it both? You know, I think we can say this about any art form, right? I'm sure everybody feels like they're going crazy at some point in their animation or their illustration process. Like, what am I doing? How am I going to finish this piece? You know, but repetition is mastery. Just remember that quote. Oh, don't remember the other one. Okay, I have this handy dandy Venn diagram here that just kind of compares and contrasts illustration. I made this mostly for me when I was thinking about building this presentation. I was trying to think about why is animation important to you guys as illustrators, and how can thinking about things from maybe an animator's perspective help you. So I just put it on here in case it's of interest. But really what's important, this is highlighted because animation and illustration, they tell a story. Unless you talk about experimental illustration, which I won't get into today because that's a whole other ballgame. Or we can. So we're talking about narrative and story. We're talking about sequential images, shape, language, perspectives, emotion, and composition. And then we have some things that are more specific to animation. But like I said, even some of these elements like audio can be talked about in terms of illustration. And in contrast, a mutable frame, what happens when we take animation out of a frame? I was just talking before the presentation to Amanda and Dr. Elizabeth about an artist who has physical animation where he paints different size squares and spins them and has a strobe light, and it animates these beautiful two-dimensional images. And that's physical animation. So can you bring, the two can really inform each other, and they'll continue to do so as both art forms develop in really interesting and exciting ways. Okay. So just to talk a little bit about my personal experience, I started out being obsessed with armatures because I love building things with my hands, and I love working with metal and machining, stuff like that. So I designed my own armatures and taught myself how to make them from an old brass model that a teacher of mine had. And I ended up designing this armature for this character on Nokia. Let me just take it apart. So doing this, having this in my portfolio is what enabled me to get a job at Leica, which then enabled me to get to work on Nokia. Okay. All right, so here I have some images of some puppets that I worked on Pinocchio. This is a seagull puppet here, with the armature that I designed and built. And then I have some little funny animation tests. Yeah, that I just made on my phone, totally unprompted, wasn't asked to do it. This I also was not asked to make, but actually ended up being integral to the process of building a bird. So I wasn't asked to make this kind of experiment with materials, but it ended up being shown to the animation director, like the head of animation, and he said, okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. This is the material that we need to use, that first one there, which is Tyvek. Because originally someone had designed, hold on, here we go. Okay, can you see? You can see this right there, this kind of, yeah, in the corner here and over here. These are silicone wings. They're really thick, and they wanted the wings to fold on camera. These silicone wings were never going to do that, and I knew that. So I thought, okay, we're gonna have to redesign this. I'm gonna try to see if I can. And they ended up liking my experimental, just shot on my phone animation with the Tyvek. So then we developed these Tyvek wings. We made some tests, and that's what we ended up using on the phone. So experimentation is key. I would say, for me, that's always helped when I'm working on a job, is just to think about what can I do that I'm not being asked to do. So that's a little word of advice. Okay. Then I have my contact info here. Yeah, you can if you really want to write me a letter, you can ask me for my address. But it is gonna be, you can ask me for my addresses. Okay, I have some little animation tests here that might be of interest. Let's see. So this is completely unedited, and you'll be able to see some things that I'll kind of mask out in terms of this, but it's totally not even a film yet, but I'll just show it because this is what I was working on this past. There's no film. Okay, so she's crawling on screen. Okay. And then let's see, interesting one. Okay, actually, this involves some blocking, which is gonna look really weird. Before you shoot a shot, you have to, it's helpful to block out where your character is gonna be, so it's gonna look really jerky. Yeah, just like testing out some stuff. And then the animation. Wow. So, some tests there, and then we can work with this. No, wait, that's the same. So this is the DJ scene that you guys saw earlier. Again, it's like kind of a dark film, so a little tough, but that, and then last one. This is again also out of order a little bit, but you get the idea. There we go. So that's what I got so far. There's more, but let's go back to the beginning. Are there any questions, comments? I have to stay in here. Yeah, yeah.
Pete, so the armature that you made for the character from Pinocchio, were you already familiar with the character from Pinocchio and you added an armature, or like where were you coming into that development process? Yeah, the one on the right.
So I got a printout like this, and also it's the art for the sort of concept that was finalized and approved. So as an illustrator, you could be a concept artist or something, and you can be doing art. And then you would do the to scale kind of art, and I would get that as a fabricator and kind of spec out where everything goes. So I'm taking, by spec out, I mean take measurements, and I have to also have a mold to do that. So you have to kind of have a sculpt as well. So you have to have the art, the sculpt, the molds, and then you can fabricate the interior. So I was given all of that from mold making, the art department. Yeah.
So what are we looking at right there? Is that the sculpture of the character with your armature?
Let me back up here. Okay. Wedge. I think I can just that. So what we're looking at is my armature superimposed over the kind of art here. So this is for an animator reference. So everything is they know, like, you have to use this Allen key in order to tighten this character or make it looser, because every animator has specific tension. It's called tensioning the puppet, and you go in with these little hidden holes on the puppet, and you have to feel around and like tighten or loosen these joints. So I have this goes in the Bible. This goes in the Bible, so every animator can reference it.
And how many of those did you have to make?
This armature,
Yeah.
this was, they call it a one-off, so it's only one. But for other characters, like there was a priest character, I had to make 2 or 3 of him. I had to make usually 2 or 3 of some others. Yeah.
Wait, when you talk about repetition, you showed us the animated videos, and how many frames, like if you just wanted to move the hand, how many frames did you have to repeat in order to get that one movement?
Like, are you for the animated videos? Are you talking about?
Yeah, like the DJ.
Oh, yeah.
Moving the record.
Oh yeah, we can look at that. Actually, oh, wait. Maybe this is more interesting. Now I don't know if I can. This could be interesting. Yeah. looking at is Dragonframe. This is the program that is industry standard in terms of stop motion animation. So you can, students and professionals alike use the software. It's around $200. If you're a student, you can get a discount. I sound like an advertisement. It's a really good software, and there's not much like it. There are some other programs, but yeah, this is great. So this, what you have here is your F sheet. So you have all your frames here, and they number it. You can also put notes here. You can do all sorts of fancy stuff that I don't usually end up doing. You have your camera settings here. It's not hooked up to the camera, so it's for the cut. Yeah, you can do a lot here. So what happens is you can see, I don't know if you guys can see that, but it says 24 FPS. So I'm shooting at 24 frames per second, and I'm shooting on twos, which means that there's only 12 images in 1 second of animation. So to answer your question, usually I would shoot each movement twice and then run it at 24. So then if we frame through it, you'll see 1, 2, move, 1, 2. So every 2 frames, right? And that's enough to get some movement. And the faster, the larger the movement, the quicker. Like the more space you have between a movement, the faster it goes. So this is a very subtle movement for the turning of the head. It happens pretty slow. But at some point, she lifts her arm up, there's some larger, that's a pretty big move. Right? You can animate on you can animate on 4s, you can animate on 3s, but this is on 2s. Some movements that are in here or in some other shots might be on 1s. You can switch between the frame, like the frame rate, but you don't ever change the actual frame rate here. You just take more pictures. That changes the frame rate. The reason for that is due to exporting stuff, which is boring, but yeah, that's important to keep that 20. A lot of students mess with that, and yeah. Question.
Are you moving the puppet every single time between the shots?
Yeah, every 2 photos. So basically, you can animate people too, like puppets. So I'm a puppet, like I'm gonna wave, you move the arm, take a picture, take another picture, arm, take a picture, take another picture. Every time you move your puppet, you take 2 pictures. We're shooting on 2s. So
Or are you loosening it with the Allen wrench and just moving it a little bit?
No, this is actually a wire puppet, which is totally a different way to make puppets. And this is also an Estonian way to make wire puppets, which is like a whole thing that I just didn't know how to do. I thought I knew how to make puppets. Turns out I didn't. But yeah, so this is a wire puppet, so there's no tensioning involved with this puppet. There's no real difficult mechanics. It's just wire, and it will break eventually, and then you have to scrap it or stitch it up and, do some puppet surgery. On every film, there's a puppet hospital. In case you're wondering, there's a puppet hospital. Even the steel puppets sometimes break. Not my puppet. But they will break sometimes, like a ball will come loose, and yeah, that can happen. Or some screw can break. Yeah, they undergo a lot of stuff.
Right.
Usually, like a before and after image of the puppets, like they look beautiful, and then at the end of the film, they're like all mangled, dirty and stuff. Oh, was there a question about?
Yeah, is the outer part made with like wool or?
Yeah, this is a felted puppet. I have a other picture. Yeah, so I was felting this puppet. I covered it in fabric first, and then I felted with needle felting and raw wool to cover the surface of the puppet, which is actually a really classic technique that was used on. Oh well, that's terrifying. Kind of like steroids. Which was used on Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. So many other films are felted at that. I'm not thinking of, but Rudolph is the really famous Rankin and Bass. Any kind of Rankin and Bass animal is usually felted.
Oh.
Yeah. You see there you see the. Well, yeah. There's other surface treatments you can do as well. Oh yeah.
So even today in PW Children's Bookshelf, there was a debut of an animator who's made a picture book, a children's picture book. I mean, we Molly Idle, you know, I mean, there's so many
Yeah.
really famous picture book people who came out of Pixar or animation. What do you think that is that creates that thread that translates so well into picture books?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so. Kind of coming back to, let's see, probably this frame will be the best show. Coming back to kind of sequential art and illustration and animation, I think animation, you need to have those keyframes in order. Well, you can animate without keyframes if you're being experimental, but normally you have keyframes. And if you have keyframes, you basically have book, you know, in a way, because the keyframes are the points in the animation that are moving your plot forward, or they're essential poses that you need to have that are really clear in order just to get the clarity of the emotion that you're trying to get across. So you can't necessarily use all your keyframes as a book. That's really oversimplified, but you can take a frame like this. If this was a film, you could just take that and have it in a book. This was a graphic novel first, and I don't think it's a film, sadly, as I know of, but either you could turn one into the other so easily. And like, I do think the fixed framing really helps with that. I like a standardized frame. I think that limitation actually really helps. Yeah.
It's like for us who like to illustrate, and if we were like to try to experiment into animating our characters and stuff like that, what would you recommend would be like an accessible way, or just like for our own personal endeavors to like try animating?
Like if you want to just learn animation kind of on your own time.
But like just small scale, like I know there's appropriate dreams and stuff like that. So, but just like small scale, try to, you know, for our own purpose, like see our characters like in like.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, Procreate Dreams, even regular Procreate for really, really simple one, it just has one layer that you can animate on. Also, I think doing it on paper is really important, and it's really easy. You can make a flip book like so fast. You can make a flip book. And you can buy index cards for $1 at CVS or something, and just there's your frame, and then just kind of draw, and you can shoot it with your phone. I recommend the Stop Motion Studio app. It's free. There's also a paid version you can use. But Stop Motion Studio, you just put your phone, you know, on some glass, or you have to make a hole or something to rest it on. You have your index cards underneath, and you can just, you know, number the index cards so you can keep track of it, and then play around with your animation. I would always recommend working traditionally, because I think it has just a nice feeling to it, and you also can't erase. You have to work with your mistakes a little more, which I can always sort of tell when people have animated traditionally versus only digital. You can kind of tell. So I recommend traditional. Especially if you're just doing tests, you might have lost that. But you can also drop your digital character if you're only working digitally into Procreate or something, and kind of do your onion skin, like your opacity, over the top, and animate like that. Oh, and I would look up the 12 Principles of Animation. There's a great video. It's kind of long, but if you stick with it, he goes over even more than that, but there's kind of 12 essential ones that you need. So I would look at that video. It explains it very simply and very well. So that's a great video.
You'll see it in the design class. We share it in the design class.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
For those who aren't in design class.
When you get to the design class.
It's called the 12 Principles of Animation. If you look that up, you can find it on YouTube. It's got this kind of like sepia tone with just some digital black line drawings on it, and it shows you squash and stretch and follow through with movement and all that good stuff. Yeah. Other questions? Oh yeah,
I have a silly question, but I am curious about it.
I love it.
What is your favorite animated film for the animation, and what's your least favorite animated film for the animation?
Oh wow. Oh my god. Okay. For the animation specifically?
Yeah.
Any other questions?
So it's interesting that as you're saying that about how slick they look. because I make a point in my American cinema course to show at least one animated film, and almost always I choose stop motion. And the students don't know first really that stop motion exists or that this. And sometimes they've seen stop motion without knowing that these are physical objects that are being filmed by the camera. I try to show a lot of the sort of behind the scenes, how they made it, how they animated it. And I wonder if even now, you're talking about sort of the charmingness of having something that clearly has that ability in it. If an unknowing, I won't say uneducated, but an unknowing audience would even with that, those cues be able to pick them out to say, this was made by a human hand instead of a computer.
It can be hard to tell. It can be hard for even me to tell sometimes with independent films that are coming out. I've been to a lot of film festivals recently, and sometimes even I can't. I'm like, is that a puppet? Is it not? Is it a blend of puppet? There's so many ways you can sort of blend a medium or make it look, one way. So, I do think though that the relationship of the people to this little $1 million doll that they've built and then physically touched, like, I do think that relationship comes through in the film, and usually you can pick out certain things, you can see it in the light because it really exists. And I think the fact that stop motion puppets really exist in a real space with you, you can have this tangible relationship to the object that is, to me, really important. And that's why I love stop motion so much. I can't get enough. I'm obsessed. So yeah, I think that it's important to point that out though to people, especially if you want to educate them about animation and you're picking stop motion. I do think like that's awesome that you're doing that. And thank you for informing people that it exists. But yeah, it's important to let them know that it's real, I think. Yeah. So yeah.
How do you see AI technologies affecting stop motion? Because stop motion is so much about building these models. So
Yeah.
how do you see things adapting and changing or not?
I'm not that worried about stop motion particularly because it's you can't really make stop motion with AI. You can make something that looks like stop motion, but that technology's already existed for a long time. And I think stop motion folks have already been under stress and maybe even replaced by, CNC machines and things that will replace master machinists. And that is happening. So that's already, I feel that stop motion has already sort of gone through a lot of the hardships that it's going to. And I don't think AI, it can't do a whole lot to stop motion because it's physical, unless you're talking about the digital elements like compositing and things like that. So as far as the digital elements, when you combine stop motion with digital, which Leica does a lot, and Pinocchio also did that a little bit, although they tried not to. Those elements, could be maybe, I think animation as a whole is definitely going to be affected by it, but stop motion in particular is somehow a little bit safeguarded for now, because it's in the physical realm. Yeah.
I have one hopefully last question. Can you tell everybody a little bit about your journey right now? Because you're on a really interesting journey at the moment.
Yeah. So I'm currently studying at the Estonian Academy of Arts. I'm getting my master's in animation there. The program was referred to me by several colleagues, and it actually has a partnership with Rhode Island School of Design. It's the only school in the U.S., I believe, on the kind of Erasmus sheet. So people from Estonia can come to Rhode Island School of Design. And my department head particularly has a relationship with the department head at ECA. He was on a Fulbright at Rhode Island School of Design. He's had a really cool class. But Eastern Europe has this incredible tradition of puppets and animation, and I think so. I have it earlier. Oh yeah, like this image here is from Burn Flower. It's a Soviet animation. There's an incredible era of Soviet animation. When the Soviet Union existed, there was actually some funding for a lot of these incredible films to be made. So there's this kind of Eastern European, I mean, a lot of other things were not so great, but animation didn't do too terribly in some respects. And there's a lot of beautiful films that came out of the Soviet era of animation. So Estonian animation has some of that influence, but also it has its own flavor of animation because it's not actually like a Slavic country. It's more Finnish. It has a connection to the forest and magical kind of roots. So studying animation there is really, really fascinating. And my department head, his name is Ulo Pikov. If you want to look him up, you can also ask me later. He has incredible animations with puppets, like big puppets, small puppets, all sorts of really cool puppets. Yeah, it's an amazing opportunity.
Okay.
I think also worth adding is that, we see oftentimes in big budget motion pictures still puppetry used. And for a lot of special effects, when you need something that's tactile, and sometimes the only way to do it is with a little bit of sleight of hand and some stop motion.
Yeah.
It's still a practical effect to use for regular filming.
Absolutely. I think that's a great plan. I think that practical effects are coming back, and you can also see them used in commercials as well. A lot of commercials like to have like a fun, funky spin by adding stop motion, but I'm glad that they do that. Even if it's just for a commercial. But yeah, practical effects, it's hard to replace them. Even with where AI is at and CG effects, it's hard to just get that, like if you watch American Werewolf in London or something, you'll see that the effects still hold up and they're incredible. I don't know if you like a scary movie, but if you do, it's a great film. And Dan Winston, I believe, did the practical effects on that. It's not animation, but it's still incredible. And it's really in front of the camera.
Gates, thank you so very much. That was fascinating.